Thank you, Abby. What an interesting thing about this building. I'm a little disappointed that we're not here to exchange rum. Sweet. So as Abby mentioned, I wear quite a number of hats. I'm based in Christchurch. I might not sound like I'm from Christchurch, but I've been there 11 years and I'm now officially a dual citizen, which is very exciting for me. You cannot get rid of me no matter how hard you try, sorry. And I wear a number of hats in Christchurch. I run TEDx Christchurch. I co-founded Ministry of Awesome, not an official government ministry. And I'm the New Zealand ambassador for Singularity University, and that's really what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So Singularity University was founded by these two guys. These guys are really kind of titans of the tech world. The guy on the left is Ray Kurzweil, and he invented like everything. He invented flatbed scanners, he invented optical character recognition, he invented text-to-speech for blind people, he invented like a million other things. He's been called the rightful heir to Edison. He's got 20 honorary doctorates. He's received honors from 3 US presidents. So, I mean, he's a pretty like spectacular dude, but almost more interestingly and more relevant to tonight's discussion is that they've gone back and looked at the predictions that he's made about technology since the 90s, and they found that he has an 86% accuracy rate. Right? So worth paying attention to when he makes observations about what is happening with the future of technology. The guy on the right is Peter Diamandis, also a real icon of the tech world in his own right. I see some nodding heads. Peter founded X Prize Foundation, which does large cash prizes for incredibly ambitious but extremely well-bounded tech challenges. So the first one that they did was a $10 million US prize for the first private group that could get a manned spacecraft to the stratosphere and back, land it safely, and then repeat the feat within 2 weeks. And that prize is what led to Virgin Galactic and SpaceX. Pretty much the entire private space industry was kickstarted by this one prize. And they've repeated that model in all sorts of industries. They've done it in education and in healthcare and in dealing with drought. And they found that as a model for spurring investment in research and development, it's tremendously effective. They put up this large cash prize, and they'll get hundreds of teams from around the world competing to win the prize. And what will happen is each one of those teams will be investing their own time, their own headspace, their own money into their particular version of the solution. Collectively, those teams will invest anywhere from 10 to 100 times the value of the prize. So you think about that for a country like New Zealand, you go, okay, we might think the dairy industry is going to be disrupted. We set up a large cash prize, $10 million, for the first commercializable synthetic dairy product, right? Scary. We'll get to that in a minute. But what you get is, 300, 400 teams from around the world investing. You get $100 million to $1 billion worth of investment in solutions to that problem, and you have 300 or 400 different perspectives on the problem. So tremendously effective. Anyway, so these two guys got together in 2009. They made some observations about where technology had come from, where it was going, our collective ability to understand this information and act on it, and they founded Singularity University as a result. And SU, as we call it, is based at the NASA Ames Research Center in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. NASA Ames is simultaneously like the coolest place on the planet and the weirdest place on the planet, or one of them anyway. So you pull up, and I first got involved with them a little over a year ago. I did their executive program in March 2015. 6-day program, and I rock up to this place and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm at NASA, that's so cool. And I get to the front gate and there's this guard there and he checks my ID and I'm like, oh, it's so official, I'm being checked into NASA. And then I go through the gate and I realize he didn't check it like against anything, like nobody knew that I was coming. So all he really did was confirm that I own ID. So I don't know how useful that is. And then I go in and I'm like, oh, there's a space shuttle, like I'm at NASA, it's so awesome. And then you look a little bit closer at it and it's kind of made out of paper mache and sort of like dinged up and shonky. And anyway, the whole place is just really weird. Like, I think it had its heyday kind of in the 70s, and now it's sort of desolate, but still has all these really cool artifacts from like the height of the space program in the 70s. So it's got these random like airplanes and space vehicles kind of dotted around the place, but these huge, vast, empty areas. This thing was directly across from the barracks where we stayed. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, what is this thing? It's crazy. This whole front opens. You see that big line? Like the whole front of that thing opens. It was originally built to house fully inflated blimps. To give you a sense of scale, see this teeny yellow, that's a road sign, this teeny yellow thing down here. This thing was massive. We didn't, like the star on the top, what's that about? We just have it was so weird. And we were staying across the street from this in these astronaut barracks. I loved your story about the dormitories downstairs, and it was kind of like the place we were staying. We're in these astronaut barracks, and the whole thing was like, we've traveled back in time to the 70s, except we're in this super futuristic version of the 70s, except aliens have come and taken all the people away. So our rooms, I'm sleeping in astronaut barracks, it's awesome, and there was this incredibly like futuristic intercom system on the wall, like for, these like high-tech futuristic communications, because you could push a button and talk to somebody. It's just awesome. So while I was there, as I said, I was there for 6 days. We did all sorts of really cool things. We did the Marshmallow Challenge. Anybody ever do the Marshmallow Challenge? A few nodding heads, right? Marshmallow Challenge, you get 20 sticks of spaghetti, a meter of string, a meter of tape, and a marshmallow. And you have to build, you get put up into teams, you get 18 minutes. You have to build the tallest structure you can build, and the marshmallow has to be on top. The people who invented this challenge have run it thousands of times with groups all over the world. And they found a couple of really interesting patterns. The first is that among the groups that consistently perform the worst on the Marshmallow Challenge are recent MBA graduates. And the second is that among the groups that perform the best on the Marshmallow Challenge are kindy students, so 5-year-olds. Right, we did that. We played with robots. This is a dancing robot. We love the dancing robot. This is a Rubik's Cube solving robot. So you give it a messed up Rubik's Cube in the top, solves the cube. This is actually a Lego Mindstorms project. So for those of you who have kids or who enjoy Lego, I'm not judging. Lego is not inexpensive, but it's a consumer product, right? So this is not like some inaccessible robot thing that you need to have access to, billions of dollars. This is a consumer product you can buy off the shelf. We also did sumo wrestling robots. So we went to this place called Tech Shop. And we built these robots, and then we kitted them out with all sorts of stuff like, paper plates and plastic forks, and we pitted them against each other. Our robot had to push the other robot off the platform. The robots can only see the white line and each other, so they're not very smart. They just turn in circles until they see the other robot, and then they push the other robot off I can tell you, I had no idea what a vicious streak I had inside myself until I played sumo wrestling robots. And I was like, finish him! But really, SU is not just about robots, and I don't think you came here tonight to look at my holiday snaps. What it's really about is understanding exponentially accelerating technologies, and specifically how they can be used to address humanity's biggest challenges. So we spent 6 days learning about what I call bright, shiny things. We learned about nanotechnology, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, the future of crime, the future of work. Underpinning all of it, a few core insights that start with this guy. So this is Gordon Moore. He's one of the co-founders of Intel Corporation. In 1965, he made the observation that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit had been doubling every 18 to 24 months, as far back as he could see. And he made a prediction that this trend would continue as far forward as he could see. This became known as Moore's Law. I suspect many people in this room have heard of this. So one of the first insights from SU comes from Ray Kurzweil, he of the 86% accuracy rate. Ray zoomed out on Moore's Law. He said, actually, if instead of looking at transistors on an integrated circuit, we look instead at what we'd call the price performance of computing. How many million instructions per second can you buy for $1,000? That number has been doubling for over 100 years. Since the beginning of computing, starting with electromechanical punch cards and moving on to relays, and then vacuum tubes, and then transistors, and then integrated circuits, every time we max out on the capability of a particular technology, another technology comes along to continue that underlying doubling trend. This is another version of that chart looking specifically at what those MIPS, those million instructions per second, kind of equate to. So today, for $1,000, you can buy roughly the number of instructions per second that a mouse brain can process, right? But according to Kurzweil, by about 2023, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second that a human brain can process. And extrapolating that further, by about 2049, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy the number of instructions per second of all human brains on the planet combined. This doubling curve is why you, today, via the smartphone in your pocket, have access to more information than Bill Clinton had the entire time that he was president of the United States. I reckon that's why he looks kind of pissed off here. Wish I had an iPhone. Although, seriously, like, he's probably so grateful Instagram was not a thing when he was president. Right. The second core insight is that those doubling trends don't just apply to computing. They apply to any information-enabled technology. So consider photography, right? Photography used to be substrate-enabled. It used to depend on the physical film in order to be able to do the thing. And then it became digitized. It became information-enabled. It relied instead on ones and zeros. And today, you can get a smartphone with a 41-megapixel camera, right? So these are a few of the technologies that we're seeing following a doubling curve. Computing is the first one, but also artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech, nanotech, medicine, neuroscience, energy, all following that same kind of doubling curve that Moore observed in transistors. Doubling curves have some really interesting characteristics that make them really compelling to pay attention to. The first is that they look flat for a really long time. And you'll know this if you ever try to do that trick where you fold a piece of paper in half 8 times, that party trick, right? So first fold, easy. Second fold, easy. Third, you're like, this is dumb. Why are we even doing this? It's so easy. Fourth fold, easy. And it's not until you hit that 6th, 7th, that 8th fold of the paper that things start to get really crazy. The second characteristic is that our brains are fully not wired to think this way. We evolved like on the savannah, right? Where if a predator is coming at us, we need to be able to predict. It's coming from there, it'll get to here in this kind of amount of time. If we're chasing prey, we need to be able to go, the prey is going to move from there to there, not from there to the moon, right? Like, how can you track this? As a result, the experts continue to predict linear, despite all evidence to the contrary. Gordon Moore himself twice said that Moore's law was over. Both times proven wrong. Like, Gordon Moore can't get his own law right. So what hope do the rest of us have? But the difference between something following a linear progression and something following a doubling trend is insane. If you take 30 linear steps, you're back at the elevator. 30 doubling steps, you're 26 times around the planet. And the thing is, you're not halfway there until the 29th step. So it's really hard to know how you're tracking along this progression. This is a modified visual representation of it. So that white line is traditional linear business growth. It's held aloft by what we call sustaining innovations, right? Things like your car gets slightly faster, it gets slightly more fuel efficient. You go from a tape player to a CD player to satellite radio to Bluetooth, Spotify. Whatever. It's doing the same thing it's always done, but like slightly better. That red curve, that's a doubling curve, right? Looking flat for a really long time, hanging out down here in what we'd call the Trough of Disappointment. 3D printing is a really good example of this. 3D printing, I hadn't realized before I went to SU, 3D printing has been around for over 35 years, right? 35 years. Oh my gosh, it's going to change everything, right? Trough of disappointment. And then what happens? It hits that inflection point, that 7th, 8th fold of the paper, and it goes from disappointment into chaos and amazement. And what do all the incumbents on that white line say? It came out of nowhere. There's no way we could have known. Here's a really good example of this, self-driving cars. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of self-driving cars, Google self-driving car program. This is one of their cars. Awesome thing about this car was actually designed specifically for the self-driving program. So it is only made for the computer. It doesn't have a steering wheel. It doesn't have a gas pedal. It doesn't have a brake pedal. It does have side view mirrors. Why does it have side view mirrors? Because the road code does not require a steering wheel, a brake pedal, a gas pedal. Does require side view mirrors. I don't think the robot cares, but they have to comply with the road code. Quick show of hands. How many people in this room, and I'm expecting this to be a very advanced room, how many people in this room think self-driving cars are going to be a thing in the hands of consumers on the roads in 10 years? Show of hands. Lots. 5 years? 2 years? Okay. This is a Tesla Model S. Elon Musk and his team have sold over 100,000 of these. Last October, they released a push update to these vehicles. That means if you own one of these cars, your car got upgraded overnight while you slept. You didn't have to do anything, giving them autopilot functionality. Over 100,000 cars on the road with autopilot functionality. This is not full autonomy, to be clear, but it is autopilot functionality. They've taken over 400,000 pre-orders for the Model 3. Those guys roll off the line next year, everyone with autopilot functionality standard. And this is a guy asleep at the wheel as his Model S drives down the road. Now you look at this and you go, that's kind of scary, right? Like, surely the driver should not be asleep at the wheel. But this doesn't scare me. The robot is driving this car. What scares me is the guy who's videoing while he should be paying attention to the road. And here's the thing to understand about why these curves double, why they accelerate. Like, what drives that phenomenon? And what drives it is that every technology builds on the previous technology. So when Google's self-driving car program hit 1 million miles traveled, that was last June. That was a huge milestone for them. Tesla, since they released this push update in October, their cars have driven over 100 million miles self-steered. They've gathered over 780 million miles worth of data, and they collect 1 million miles worth of data every 10 hours. Something to consider in Christchurch, where I live, as we're rebuilding this city for the next 20, 30, 50 years, is that self-driving cars don't need parking. They just need a place to wait. And if the place they're waiting is inconvenient, they can go wait somewhere else, right? The office that I work out of has this great honking car park building going up opposite it. I don't know what the payback period is, 25 years, 50 years? Like, are they factoring this into their strategic investment process, into their decision making? I doubt it. The other thing that's happening is that not only are these technologies accelerating, they are also starting to converge. So now we have to consider what happens when an exponential progression in artificial intelligence converges with an exponential progression in big data. What happens when an exponential progression in bioengineering converges with an exponential progression in 3D printing at the atomic scale? What does it all mean? Pretty much everything you've seen in science fiction is not only possible, but plausible and probably already here. This is a great example. I imagine a few Star Trek fans in the room. Right, so this is the medical tricorder from Star Trek. You go down to some alien planet. You come back with some weird alien bug. You go to the sick bay. They have this handheld device that they just run up and down your body. It tells you what's wrong with you. This is what it looks like in real life. This is the Scanadu Scout. It's part of a $10 million X Prize for the first handheld diagnostic device that can beat the diagnosis of 7 out of 10 board-certified physicians across a range of 12 ailments. They started with over 300 teams. They're down to the final 7. This is one of them. They're doing clinical trials right now. They'll announce the winner in January. Like, the Star Trek tricorder is a thing. It's here. People do weird things with exponential technologies. These guys have figured out a way to inject night vision directly into your eyeballs. If you're squeamish, you might want to look away for the next slide. This is what it looks like once he's done it. He now has night vision for about 12 hours. How do you regulate this, right? How do you equip your healthcare system to cope with this? This guy is a freak, right? 3D printing, I mentioned 3D printing earlier. 35 years, it's gonna disrupt everything. 35 years, what do we get? Shitty models of Yoda's head. Like, this is not disruptive. There is no incumbent Yoda's head shitty model industry that's going, oh my gosh, the 3D printers are stealing our lunch. But so here's what happened. One of the things that happened to me when I went to SU is that I heard about all sorts of things I had already heard about, but I understood them in a totally different way, right? It gave me a cohesive narrative. I took all these disparate data points and was able to put them into this cohesive narrative that kind of all of a sudden just made sense to me in a totally different way. So 3D printing, we hear about this. Oh, it's following a doubling curve. Oh, soon it's going to hit that inflection point where it goes from disappointment into chaos and amazement. And a week after I leave SU, I go to TED. And at TED, this guy, Joseph DeSimone, gets up on stage, and he's like, 3D printing sucks. And the reason it sucks is because it's not actually 3D printing. It's 2D printing over and over again. They print a layer and another layer and another layer and another layer, and as a result, there are a ton of problems with it. You can't do bridges properly, you can't do spans, you can't do free-floating objects within objects. The mechanical tolerances are terrible. The structural integrity is terrible. It's super slow, and as a result, it's super expensive. And Diamandi's like, I don't want a 3D printer that's a 2D printer over and over again. I want a 3D printer that works like the T-1000 from Terminator 2, where the object just emerges fully formed from the soup, and I just want it to be the thing. Like, it shouldn't have to go through this layer process. And so that's what he was there launching. He built it. This is called CLIP, Continuous Liquid Interface Production. This plate at the top pulls the object fully formed from this tray of soup at the bottom. This object was printed on stage at TED while he was speaking. It took about 5 minutes to print. It solves every issue with current models of 3D printing. You can do bridges, you can do objects within objects, you can do spans. The mechanical tolerances are perfect. The structural integrity is perfect. You look at it under the microscope and it's like immaculate. It's 25 to 100 times faster than current 3D printing technology. And I watched him give this talk, and I had 3 reactions. And the first was what I would have thought anyway, whether I'd been to SU or not, which was, whoa, that's really cool. Fair enough. The second is, of course, it's 25 to 100 times faster, and not 7% faster. Of course, as DeSimone says, the next iteration is going to be 1,000 times faster, because that's what an exponential curve looks like. And my third reaction was, now I get it. Now I get how 3D printing totally disrupts global manufacturing and freight. Because why would you ever pay to manufacture 20,000 of something in China and pay to ship it and pay to store it and have breakage and have loss and have theft and have it go out of date when you literally can push the button and get the thing? Right, that was over a year ago. They got a bunch of investment. They've been kind of dark since then. But this was just a week or 2 ago. Hewlett-Packard launched this new Jet Fusion 3D printer. It can print electronics inside a product. It is 10 times as fast as their current 3D printers and half the price. Once you understand these exponential curves, you will see them everywhere. And what does all that add up to? Opportunity, huge opportunity, and also terror. Current projections are anywhere from 47 to 81% of jobs, as we currently understand them, under threat from technology within 20 years. So you might have seen this in the news a couple weeks ago. Apple supplier Foxconn, 60,000 jobs gone from its factory, replaced by robots. This is the kind of job replacement that we're familiar with. We're used to factory workers losing their jobs to automation, right? And this may sound distasteful, but the fact is, like the people in this room, it affects us, but it doesn't really affect us. You know what I'm saying? Yes?
Where are they being replaced?
This is in China. So this is, oh, where are the robots?
Mark Andreessen quoted last week that people are coming off and being replaced, but these other work for them emergence. It's not a total loss.
Okay, I don't know where they're going, and it's certainly worth looking into. So one of the things, actually, to your point, I'll pick that up if you don't mind. So this thing about 47 to 81%, I don't actually say that to fearmonger. So historically, what we found, we've been here before, right? Combine harvesters are coming, they're going to destroy all the jobs. Mechanical sewing machines are coming, they're going to destroy all the jobs. Every time we've been here before, new technologies have created more jobs than we've lost. So I assume that's the point you're making, right? That these workers go and they get to do something else. That is certainly true and certainly a possibility. We've never been here at this speed and at this scale. And the thing is, no matter what the ultimate result is, the transition is virtually guaranteed to be messy, right? Truck driving is one of the biggest industries in the Midwest of the US, 2 million truck drivers. Right? Those guys are going to be out of the jobs. It is difficult to readily retrain them into another blue-collar kind of job. So I don't say this to be a fearmonger. I say this because this is something that I think we need to be paying more attention to than in historical instances when 200 years. I've got 200 years of articles saying the robots are coming, they're going to eat all our jobs, right? And because of this doubling curve and because of the convergence of these technologies, this is something I think we need to be paying closer attention to than we ever have before. So, like I said, this kind of thing we're used to. And we go, oh, they're losing jobs, maybe they'll go somewhere else and be replaced somewhere else. I don't know if you saw this one, artificially intelligent lawyer Ross has just been hired by its first law firm. Or this one, an artificially intelligent teaching assistant helped students online for an entire semester and nobody noticed. So this thing, now all of a sudden you go, so this thing with the truck drivers, right? Like, what do you do with the truck driver? You go, okay, we're going to train you to be a nanotechnologist, right? We're going to train you to be a hyper-creative entrepreneur. We're going to train you for something that the robots can't do, but that's a difficult thing to do. So we have to be actively discussing this stuff, right? Here's another one. Deep learning algorithm went from being able to recognize cats, huge leap forward for deep learning, not really that marketable a skill. I have a 2-year-old stepson. He can recognize cats, no problem. Nobody is knocking on his door to offer him a job. To being able to recognize numbers, huge leap forward again, still not really that marketable. To being able to recognize mitosis in cancer cells, which currently requires a trained pathologist, except the computer can do it 1,000 times as fast and 1,000 at a time, and will only ever get better at it. Every new human pathologist has to start from zero. Every new computer starts with the sum total of all the knowledge of all the previous computers, which is why these things accelerate. This is where that 47 to 81% number comes from, in case you were wondering. It's charting employment along a vision, movement, and language reasoning axis. And so this is where we say, okay, if the cognitive abilities of artificial intelligence and the dexterity of robotics begin to move along those axes, everyone who drops off the bottom has to move further along the continuum in order to be employable again. Crime also starting to follow exponential curves. You might have seen this story from last year. A guy on an airplane hacked into the plane's control systems, briefly increased power to one of the engines, caused the plane to fly sideways for about 15 seconds. This story is crazy. And it's crazy for a few reasons. Number one is that, that's crazy to hack into things. Number two, the guy, he hacked in via the in-flight entertainment system. He plugged into the USB port in the seat back in front of him and got access to the plane's engines. So this guy, obviously, super smart in terms of computers, not very smart in other ways, right? Number one, I don't think it's very smart to mess with the engines of the plane that you are on. That's just basic rule number one for me. Number two, the guy, once he had done this, he tweeted about it from his seat. And so the FBI, somewhat unsurprisingly, was waiting for him when the plane landed and took him away. But it just speaks to the point that when everything is connected, everything is vulnerable. I think this chart is awesome. I love it. This chart is called Welcome to the Terror Dome. That's not my name for it. That was given to it by the people who created this chart at the CIA, the Energy Information Agency, the World Bank. Hippies all. This chart is basically an inverse of that price performance of computing chart that I showed at the beginning. So what this is mapping is the price per million BTUs of energy by different fuel types. And we got 5 fuel types here, and the first 4 start way back in 1949, and they bump along the bottom. Over the years, the price goes up, the price goes down. Over time, it gradually trends upward. That's what linear technology looks like, and those are the fossil fuels. And starting way over here, doesn't even come onto the chart until 2007. And when it comes onto the chart, it's so expensive that all the incumbents are like, it'll never compete. We don't have to worry about it. It'll never be a thing. And then the price plummets. That's solar, right? Solar is currently following a doubling in price performance every 22 months. At current rates, we're going to hit 100% of world energy supply deliverable by solar by 2023. And if it continues to follow a doubling curve, that means 2025, we're at 200%, 2027, we're at 400%, and we have to completely shift our problem space for economics away from the allocation of scarce resources and towards what does the world look like when resources are free and abundant. Right. So now you get this kind of sales pitch. Sorry. Yes, sir. What do you mean it goes backwards? Yeah, you would have had me there. That would have been so embarrassing for me. But instead, right. So, okay, so here's the thing. A lot of these predictions, a lot of these observations, they may sound fantastical, fair enough. B, because this is a 20-minute, half-hour talk, whatever it is, they also sound simplistic. And I'm not trying to make anything sound either impossible or simplistic. These things, they may or may not follow exactly a doubling trend in this way. They may or may not hit, exactly at 2023 or exactly at 2049. That's not the point. The underlying point to understand what an exponential curve looks like, why it happens, why these things subsequently accelerates, that's the really critical point, right? With artificial intelligence, you might have heard about AlphaGo beating the world Go champion Lee Sedol a couple months ago. And what happened, as soon as that happened, which was a decade before the people working on the project thought it would happen, the Korean government committed $3 billion to invest in artificial intelligence because it became sexy. What does that $3 billion do? It further accelerates the progress of the artificial intelligence. So what happens is you get vectors lining up, and they create virtuous cycles, and they feed on each other, and these things become ever stronger. So I finished this 6-day program of bright, shiny things and this sort of paradigm-shifting mindset, and I came away going, this really affects all of us, right? This really affects everybody in New Zealand. It affects our economy, it affects our government, it affects our healthcare system, our education system, and I don't think we're really prepared for it. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned earlier that I heard about a lot of things that I had already heard about, but I understood them in a different way. So I'll give you just one more example of that. One of the things that they talked about, they had a guy get up on stage, Raymond McCauley, who's like the digital biology guy. And he gets up on stage and he talks about bioengineered milk. And this is milk that is milk. They take like a yeast and they genetically modify it and they brew it in the lab. Like, I don't understand exactly the process, but they basically create milk, and it's cow milk that just hasn't gone through a cow, right? And they've done this. It's genetically and chemically, it's identical to cow milk. And they've done this not only with cow milk, they've done this with human milk, they've done this with narwhal milk. You know narwhal, like the unicorn of the sea? Right, okay. So they've created these milks, right? And I'm watching this guy, and my reaction is like, ew, gross, who would want it, right? Sounds disgusting. Set that aside. Late that night, I'm having an offline conversation with Salim Ismail, who's the founding exec director of SU. And we weren't talking about milk. We were talking about this company, Modern Meadow, that's one of the SU companies, and they do synthetic meat, and they do synthetic eggs. And so I'm like a super lefty liberal hippie, right? Like, I need to know the name of the chicken before I'll eat the egg. And so my reaction to the eggs and the meat is the same as my reaction to milk. Ew, gross, who would want it? Sounds disgusting. And Salim's like, Kaila, they're not targeting you. They're not interested in you. They're not after the hippies, they're not after the vegans, they're not even after Whole Foods, which is a pretty decent-sized company. They're after the industrial caterers who buy eggs by the thousands of kilos. And they need them in powder form, and in liquid form, and in tube form. And they need them to last longer on the shelf, and be 100% salmonella-free, and total certainty of supply. And they need them to brown nicely around the edges, and taste more like egg. And they need them to be cheaper. And by every one of those metrics, just a moment please, sir, by every one of those metrics, the bioengineered product wins. And I went, shit, you're right. Like, if that's your distribution strategy, then I went, actually, by those metrics, the bioengineered milk product probably wins as well. And then I went, actually, even with my hippie hat on, I probably prefer the bioengineered products to the factory farm products. Like in the US, the food system's just vile. And then I went, actually, like, this is the backbone of our economy in New Zealand. Like, are we taking this seriously, right? They're not at scale with this milk. Like, it's not, it's in the trough of disappointment and disillusionment. So are we taking it seriously that one day it's going to come out of nowhere and there's no way we could have known? So I came away going, I have to do what I can to help further this conversation. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing this more with you. I can see you're very antsy in your chair to have this conversation. So I'm just gonna ask you to sit tight until I get through this, and then we can pick this up. So I came back going, okay, we need to have more of a conversation. And the reason we need to have more of a conversation is not because anybody has any kinds of answers. We don't have any kinds of answers. It's because we have to have conversations about questions that we won't have unless we understand these technological trends. So questions like, if in fact we are facing significant technological unemployment, do we institute a minimum basic income? If we do, what are the effects on our self-identity, given that so much of our meaning is created out of the work that we do? Do we even need to work? We forget that we made up the idea of a 40-hour work week. What are the ethics of this kind of stuff? What are the ethics of self-driving cars? What are the policy implications? What are the regulatory implications? Like, there are so many huge questions that we can't begin to tackle unless we understand that we're going into this space that requires us to address these questions. So I come back from SU, and I'm like, I got to do what I can to further this conversation, and that has taken a few different forms. The first is I do a fair amount of public speaking. Pretty much all of my public-facing talks now are this talk, Intro to Exponentials, right? Doesn't matter what you ask me to talk about. Like, talk about community building, talk about Christchurch after the earthquake. I'm like, sure, and then I talk about Intro to Exponentials. The second is that Salim Ismail, the guy who told me I was full of it when I talked about the eggs, he came to New Zealand last year. Callaghan Innovation brought him down, and a fantastic man, Hal Josephson, and he did a bit of a roadshow, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, gave a sort of similar talk, and I can tell you with my TEDx hat on that Salim is one of the world's best presenters, A. B, it does not matter how good any individual presenter is, a single talk does not change behavior, right? You come to Salim's talk, you go, that guy was amazing, he blew my mind, and then you go back to work the next day, right? So for me, it was about day 2 of the exec program where I was like, I cannot unlearn what I've just learned. I can't do nothing with it. I can't go back to business as usual. And so the next step here is to go, how do we get enough people in New Zealand having a profound enough immersion in this content that we can collectively have the kind of conversations we need to have, that we can't collectively go back to business as usual. And that's a summit that we're doing in November. We're basically bringing the executive program here. It's a condensed version. We're shipping in a bunch of the faculty from SU. We have some incredible local presenters as well, doing some awesome stuff. We're talking on all the tech stuff, but then also the implications. What's the future of crime? What's the future of work? What's the future of education? Healthcare, impact and disruption, ethics. Dealing with a bunch of these things. We have this spectacular lineup. As I said, not only just this is absolutely not a case of international experts coming to tell us how it's done. It is a case of us collectively furthering our awareness of not only what's going on overseas, but what's happening right here in New Zealand. So Brad Templeton, top left, worked on the Google self-driving car program. Neil Jacobstein, part of Stanford's Media Lab, artificial intelligence guy. Mark Goodman is our future crime guy, cybersecurity, cyberterrorism. And then, as I said, like domestic amazing people as well. Sue Suckling, who's the chair of Callaghan and NZQA, talking about the future of education. Amy Fletcher from the University of Canterbury talking about technology and public policy. Melanie Johnston-Hollett, I don't know if you guys know her, she's based in Auckland, she's amazing. She's an astrophysicist who's using artificially intelligent image recognition to detect new objects in the night sky. 3 target audiences, we can talk about that later. We're also doing a challenge for high school kids in September. So the summit is 3 days in November. In September, we're running a program for high school kids that is a 1-day workshop. We're hosting those workshops in Christchurch, Wellington, and Auckland. It's a full day in each place where we're doing a deep dive into exponential technology and thinking. We're doing a deep dive into the global grand challenges, things like water, food, energy, healthcare. And then the kids get run through a kind of design thinking process to come up with a pitch for how they would leverage exponential technology to address one of humanity's big challenges. And just quickly on that, one of the programs that they did with kids at SU, it's one of my absolute favorite stories. I had these 3 girls come and participate in this program, 15, 17, 19 years old, no coding experience, no tech experience. They came up with a thing called disaster mesh, which is an airdropped mesh network. So you imagine a place like Christchurch, earthquake hits, what happens? All the comms go down. You can't text, you can't get online, you can't tell anybody that you're okay or that you're not okay. What happens here is they drop this mesh network. The nodes of the network are modeled on maple seeds, so they float down, so you don't have a situation where you've just had an earthquake and then everybody gets like donked in the head with these mesh nodes. And then once they land, anyone within that area, when you turn on your device, you get a landing page that says, I need food, I need water, I'm trapped, I'm okay. And you touch the one that replies to you, and the mesh network can instantly pinpoint your location, make it way easier for the first responders to find you. They've now patented this. They got a $250,000 US grant to commercialize it, and this is the kind of thinking that we're hoping to instill in the kids that participate in this program. And that's me, and now I'm happy to take your question as well as any other questions you have. Thank you guys very much. I'm Kaila Colbin, and I'm here at Spark Lab. I've had a fantastic evening, terrific talks, terrific people here. Come on down, get involved.